YouTube! I am Pinstar, and this is Stellaris 3.0 Quick Tips. Specifically 3.0.2. So what is my quick tip today? Well, I'm going to be reviewing some of the buffs and nerfs to the various traits, species traits, civic traits, etc., over the next couple of videos. Now, those of you who are more up to date with the patch notes of the 3.0 plus patch might be saying, well, Pinstar, they didn't really monkey around with a lot of the traits. Yeah, I mean, they tweaked a few of them to include some of the spy mechanics into them, but they didn't really do a big balance shuffle on them. Well, that's where you'd be wrong, dear viewer, because of the different the major change to the population mechanics has sort of rebalanced the traits without actually touching them. That's where the slightly confusing thumbnail is going to start to make sense, I promise. So what we're going to do is, in this first video, we're going to dive into the racial traits, specifically the biological racial traits, and explain how some of them may have been buffed or nerfed based on the changes brought to the population system. So let's dive in. All right, first up we have agrarian, bonus food from jobs. Slight nerf here because, well, let me explain a little bit more on about the population cap if you are not as familiar with it. So one of the biggest problems with the game was performance, and they trace the root of the performance problems to excessive population in the late game. It would cause people's games to slow to an unplayable crawl. So to address that, they put in a system that basically limits population growth and basically severely slows it down as it grows larger and larger, even slowing it down based on the number of population pops in your empire. Now, to counterbalance that, they've kind of buffed how much each individual pop puts out, but again, some of these traits got boosted or penalized in the balance shift here. So again, agrarian, slight nerf. Reason for that, fewer total pops means fewer mouths to feed, meaning a huge bonus to food production is not as valuable. Now, they did put in, for those who are doing the biological ascension, the cloning vats, which allows you to basically produce biological pops in the same way that you produce mechanical pops, using that assembling slot, and those things eat up a lot of food. So agrarian might actually be good if you are going the biological ascension, but if you're not, it's not. It got a little bit worse. Now, ingenious, huge buff to ingenious. Why? Because the base production of a technician went from 4 to 6, meaning this 15% bonus to that just got more powerful, more potent. Not to mention that energy is still extremely useful across the board, and no amount of the population changes has reduced its usefulness in terms of buying stuff that you need, paying upkeep, floating a larger fleet, all kinds of good stuff. So ingenious is a pretty darn good one. Industrious, I'd say minor buff. With the change of how consumer goods and alloys are produced, along with an earlier access to building slots for new colonies, there will be an uptick in demand for minerals. Unfortunately, unlike the technician, the miner did not have their base output buffed. It didn't get nerfed, but it didn't get seriously buffed. So the bonus you'll be getting the actual raw mineral bonus you'll be getting is not as big as the actual raw energy bonus you'll be getting from ingenious, but there is a lot of demand for minerals, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. Intelligent, I'd say with the changes, it's unchanged. It's still a really, really strong pick, don't get me wrong, but it has not gotten any stronger or weaker with the changes in the population cap. Research is still as important in the 3.0 plus patch as it was earlier, and that hasn't changed, so neither is intelligent. Thrifty. Thrifties, I'd say about slight nerf to Thrifty, because the clerk jobs, which is going to be the lion's share of the trade value you'll be producing in your empire, they didn't get buffed at all. They didn't get changed. And compared to a lot of the other jobs that did get boosted just from a baseline value, clerks are pretty meh. They're sort of like the catch-all thing to prevent a pop from being unemployed. But you generally want a pop working in something more useful than a clerk. So boosting that, not so good, and unless they boost up the clerks, Thrifty kind of got the short end of the stick. So minor nerf on Thrifty. The natural engineers, physicists, and sociologists, I'm going to lump those all in with intelligent. They're just as good as they were before. Yeah, they didn't get buffed or nerfed. Extremely adaptive and adaptive. Minor nerf to these. Early game growth is stronger, but with a total small number of pops, keeping up with the extra cost associated with lower habitability is easier to pay. Now that being said, they are still a lifesaver in the early game, and they give you extra flexibility to grab less than desirable worlds and still not pay through the teeth for them for the extra amenities and other pop upkeep values. So they're still useful, especially in the early game, but as the game drags on, they become less and less worth their points, and they cost quite a bit of points. So think a while before you take those. Likewise with non-adaptive, it got buffed slightly for the exact opposite reason that the previous two got nerfed. Habitability is less of a concern later on. So taking that, if you can absorb the sting in the early game, it's basically like 2 free points. Rapid breeders, slight nerf. Pop growth is still king. Even with the population limits, you want your pop to grow as quickly as possible, flesh out your planets as fast as possible, get those pops on there sooner rather than later to start making you benefits. The problem is that once you hit the pop cap, the empire-wide pop cap, which I think kicks in at over 400 pops, but don't quote me on that exactly. Once you hit your empire pop cap, the penalties start stacking on population growth, and no amount of rapid breeders plus 10 is really going to counteract that. You'll get to a point where it takes years to grow a single pop. And rapid breeders isn't going to really help that. So basically the end game kind of swallows this up. That being said, there is something to be said for, getting your pops out sooner rather than later. And in the early game, the rapid breeders is definitely well worth the points. So keep in mind that it's going to be kind of a nothing trait later on once your population gets huge. Likewise with slow breeders, again, inverse of rapid breeders. Still painful in the early game, but becomes 2 free points late game. Now when it comes to talented, quick learners, slow learners, as well as the different venerable, enduring, and fleeting, basically all of the leader boosting and penalizing traits, I will lump them all together and saying that unchanged. Just like with the research text, the importance of your leaders, it has not increased or decreased with the population changes. So they're just as good or as bad. Traditional and quarrelsome. Unity is still important, but not more or less, so unchanged between these two. Now the big winner and losers here are these two, docile and unruly. Huge nerf to docile, huge buff to unruly. So Empire Sprawl from pops. Fewer pops means that Empire Sprawl, you're going to have less Empire Sprawl from pops in general, because they're going to slow way down in the late game. Not that Empire Sprawl is hard to deal with, But yeah, docile just became a lot less useful later on, and unruly becomes basically a free trait, especially if you can just spam out the administrative buildings to counteract them anyway. So yeah, definitely, I'd almost put really in the dump stat thing. Unless you're role playing for something, unruly, if you need 2 free points for something, unruly's probably going to be the one that stings the least in the post 3.0 patch. Strong, very strong. Not too much of a change here. Minor buff with the boosting of some base worker outputs, because they get a boost to just general worker outputs. And the worth of the army damage is unchanged. Likewise with weak. For nomadic and sedentary, nomadic got a minor nerf and sedentary a minor buff. There is a couple of the civics that allow you to manually move people more easily, like a Corvée system. That kind of lets you get around the resettlement cost, which now involves influence. And also, there's a lot more ways to encourage people to naturally and automatically migrate. So you don't even have to manually migrate them anywhere. Basically via star-based modules, and even if you're just a democracy now gives you a plus 50% migration chance just naturally for free. So with many things that kind of take the place of nomadic, having nomadic is not as useful, and having sedentary is not as painful. Because note that neither of these change the automatic chance for resettlement. Not to mention the pop growth from immigration. Once you're run up against the pop cap, that gets nerfed into the ground as well. So don't think you're going to get around that by luring people from other empires into your world. The immigration population gain gets nerfed too. Now, Communal and Solitary. These are another 2 big winner and loser, with Solitary being a big winner and Communal being a bit of a loser here. Pop housing usage. Fewer pops, fewer housing to worry about. Now, this is a little bit more localized on planets because you have to source housing on a per-planet basis, but because you're dealing with fewer overall pops, especially once your empire gets larger, you don't need to worry about housing as much because the housing values themselves did not get buffed or nerfed. So Solitary is pretty much a free point. If you're looking for a free 1 point, Solitary is pretty painless. And Communal, not really worth it unless you're going for role-playing purposes, which, nothing wrong with that. Now, for Charismatic and Repugnant, the slight buff to Repugnant, slight nerf to Charismatic, but these are still useful. It kind of balances each other out, actually, because fewer pops need fewer amenities, but having excess amenities allows you to get higher happiness, which means higher stability, which means higher pop growth, which is great until you come up against the pop cap and things slow way down. So yeah, just in the long and the short of it, minor nerf, minor buff, but don't say, just because I say minor nerf to Charismatic does not mean it is a worthless trait. There are some races that absolutely benefit from it. For Conformism and Deviance, these are pretty much unchanged, because not a lot of the ethics have changed, so having pops follow your government's ethics is about as useful as it was before. Decadent. I'm going to say a minor buff to this one. The only reason is one of the other big changes they made is that robots are now able to do all baseline level tasks. They're able to be clerks, they're able to be technicians right off the bat. You don't have to wait for the droids tech for them to be able to start doing those things. And that being said, if you start out with robots or you tech into them very early, you can very easily replace your worker class with robots, and then have your have your biological pops, in the specialist and ruler category where the decadent penalty doesn't hurt them. I'm actually playtesting a race right now that has decadent, but isn't actually slavers. And that's I haven't felt the sting of that either. But so really good if you start out with robots, or if you're a materialist and go straight for robots. But without robots, it's still about as painful as it's worth there. No change in resilient, because they haven't really messed around with the army buffs and what have you. Conservationist and wasteful, minor nerf to conservationist and minor buff to wasteful. Fewer pops, meaning fewer pops using consumer goods. That being said, if you monkey around with some of the advanced living standards, utopian abundance, academic privilege, and what have you, then conservationist is a thing, because some of the more advanced ones cause your pops to use a lot of consumer goods, and having a 10% reduction in those is a little bit better. So they're still situationally useful, but overall, with the changes in the pops have given a slight buff to wasteful, slight nerf to conservationist. All right, folks. Well, that is all of the baseline traits. In our next video, we're going to talk about civics and government ethics, and also some of the new government changes and my opinions on those. So if you guys like this episode and you want to see more like it, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and leave me a comment. Good, bad, or indifferent. Your feedback's always welcome. So until next time, this has been Pinstar signing out. See ya!